The unsolved double homicide of a billionaire Canadian couple still seems to have more questions than answers 2 years on. It was December 15, 2017. Honey and Barry Sherman were discovered murdered in their Toronto home. Found in a seated position, side by side, strangled to death on the deck of their indoor swimming pool.
We did not observe any signs of forced entry to the building, and so at this point, indications are that we have no outstanding suspect to be going after.
Fast forward 2 years later.
150 items have been submitted to the Center of Forensic Sciences for testing. 243 witnesses have been interviewed. 4 terabytes of security video has been obtained. 205 tips have been provided directly to the police from the public. 343 tips have been provided so far to the police via the private investigative team. 701 investigative actions have been assigned, but we are still asking for help.
No arrests, no known suspects, just a family and community desperate for answers.
When the news broke that this couple had been found dead, everyone was stunned and horrified.
That's Catherine McDonald, Global Toronto's crime specialist who's been covering the story for the past 2 years.
Barry Sherman owned a pharmaceutical company, a giant. He was known worldwide, and his wife, Honey, was a prominent member of the Toronto community. She was a philanthropist, as was he. They were quite well known in the Jewish community. And one of the things that became quite obvious in the months after his murder was that Barry had a lot of enemies. A lot of people in his business, in the business community knew him. It was well known that he was litigious. He had sued a lot of people. And so they had to look at every possibility as to who might have had an axe to grind with this man.
Since the beginning, a number of missteps have generated intense criticism and scrutiny into how the investigation has been handled by police.
That evening, the police said there was no sign of forced entry and they weren't looking for any suspects, which led a lot of people to believe that it sounded like this could have been a murder-suicide. And the next day, a number of newspapers in Toronto were reporting, in fact, that the police were working on that theory.
It wasn't until 6 weeks later that police made this announcement.
We have sufficient evidence to describe this as a double homicide investigation, and that both Honey and Barry Sherman were in fact targeted.
Police have maintained that they believe this was a targeted murder, but of course the fact that it took them 6 weeks to come out and say it was a double murder also added to the community intrigue, and people were upset, and like the family, that it took them that long to classify it as a double murder.
We've had to navigate through a terrifying maze of non-information and unfounded speculation, all while trying to support each other emotionally.
A $10 million reward for information was offered by the family, who also hired their own team of private investigators.
There were 4 private investigators who made up that team, and they in fact took over the house, the crime scene, after the police were finished with their investigation. Brian Greenspan, this lawyer, was highly critical of how the Toronto police have handled this police investigation, saying that they missed a lot of evidence, they didn't call people back in a timely fashion.
The lack of information from authorities spawned a lot of speculation from the public with their own theories. One of them being that the couple was murdered by a professional hitman or international spy over a business deal gone wrong.
They knew the people who killed them. That's my theory. They were strangled, which is a very personal sort of attack. This is not in any way a run-of-the-mill crime. To have 2 people murdered in their own home and staged in a seated position is something that certainly I've never encountered in 35 years of reporting on crime.
If you don't hear it from the primary investigator's mouth or the major case manager's mouth, then you've got to take everything with a grain of salt.
On Monday, Toronto police announced the private team has concluded their parallel investigation and are asking the public to call them directly with any tips.
The Toronto police, for the first time, asked for the public's help, and they haven't done that in 2 years. I believe the police do have a theory of this case.
I think police want people in the community to believe that they're getting closer to solving this case, but it didn't seem to me that this is where they're at. I mean, I feel like they have looked into hundreds of tips and spoken to many people, but are they any closer? I didn't get that sense today.